Hello everybody, and thank you for joining us for our masterclass this afternoon, Solving the Cybersecurity Skills Back with DCMS. Before I hand you over to Owen Arte, our host this afternoon, I'm just going to run through a few house rules that we have for CISEC. Throughout this webinar, you will be muted, but don't worry, there will be plenty of opportunities to ask lots of questions after the presentations. Do send those over through the Q&A box, and we will ask them on your behalf. If you are experiencing any problems with Zoom or with the webinar, please just email support@cisec.org and we'll do our best to get you on. Okay, now it's my pleasure to introduce you to Owen Arte Bestman. Owen Arte has spent 15 years recruiting technology and operational risk specialists, and he's spent the last 7 years recruiting specifically in the cybersecurity field. Owen Arte, I don't know if you'd like to just go ahead and say a little bit more about yourself. I think you may be on mute.
Excuse me for that rookie error. Yes, in a nutshell, I assist security leaders find security talent. I also give them advice about current and future market trends that might affect their recruitment plans, specifically within security in a technical and non-technical capacity. The areas of expertise are primarily mid to senior level positions, all the way from security architecture to DevSecOps, right through to CISO positions and security operations across a variety of industry sectors. That's a bit of an insight.
That's lovely. Thank you for that, Owen Arte. Now I'm over to you to introduce our speakers and panelists.
Okay, hi everyone. Welcome to the Chartered Institute of Information Security Masterclass. I'm Owen Arte Bestman, Director and Founder of Bestman Solutions, and I'm very excited to be chairing this session entitled Solving the Cybersecurity Skills Gap. I'm in good company today, and I'm joined by Erica Lewis, Director of Cybersecurity and Digital Identity at DCMS, David Crozier, Head of Strategic Partnership and Engagement for the Centre for Secure Information Technologies at Queen's University Belfast, Professor Steve Fernell, Professor of Information Security at the University of Plymouth, Jayesh Shah, Public Affairs Researcher at Ipsos Mori, and Sam Donaldson, Director at Perspective Economics. Now, the masterclass is going to focus on the findings of research into the UK cybersecurity labour market carried out on behalf of the Department for Digital, Culture, Media and Sports by Ipsos Mori. That was published in March this year. So the running order of today's masterclass, our speakers will go over the findings of the study exploring 3 key areas. Number 1, the demand for cyber skills in the UK. Number 2, training and qualifications landscape. And lastly, recruitment and diversity. As was mentioned before, we're going to run a Q&A session. So if you have any questions, you can propose as many as we can towards the end of this session. So if Erica is on the line with no further avail, hello Erica, I will hand you over to Erica.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Erica Lewis. I am the Director for Cybersecurity and Digital Identity at the Department of Digital, Culture, Media and Sport, DCMS, to those who know it well. It's a real pleasure to be here with you today. I really want to thank the Chartered Institute of Information Security for organising this event. I hope you'll find it really interesting. I know I will. I thought that what I would do just briefly before we get into the meat of what we want to talk about today is tell you a little bit about what we do in DCMS around cybersecurity, and particularly the work that we do in regard to skills and professionalisation. So DCMS has 3 main responsibilities for cybersecurity within the UK government. We support the growth of the UK cybersecurity sector. We do a little bit of creating and supporting jobs and providing solutions to the cyber security threats that we think are important. We look at the regulatory environment for cybersecurity, so that's a good government job, and how we can best use UK regulations as an incentive to encourage industry to invest well in cybersecurity. And most relevant here today, we work to address the cyber skills gap that we're all facing. And we do this by improving both school-age digital skills and by providing better retraining opportunities for adults. The labour market research that we're going to talk about today forms an evidence base to guide this work, so it's really important to us as a policy team. We believe, and I'm sure you'll agree, that a highly skilled cyber workforce is central to ensuring that the UK can both continue to build a thriving digital economy and protect our national security. And we see these things as not a trade-off. They're definitely two parts of the same thing. We know that the current availability of cyber talent in the UK doesn't fulfil our needs. Together with other colleagues across government, we run a suite of initiatives that address this shortfall. For young people, we have created something called Cyber First, which is a programme of activities open to children between the ages of 13 and 17. And we also have something called a Cyber Discovery online platform that enables children to enhance their cybersecurity skills using games, so making it really good fun. These initiatives are designed to inform young people about cybersecurity and inspire them to pursue cyber careers. And they've been running for a couple of years now. They are super successful. Unlike other professions, cybersecurity lacks a formal structure. And that's the other thing we're seeking to address through the creation of an independent body to sponsor the profession. So this is going to be called the UK Cybersecurity Council, and it'll have membership from across the cybersecurity community with government as a stakeholder. The Council's first job will be to provide clarity around the confusing qualifications landscape and think through and mark out career pathways in cybersecurity. And we're hoping that the Council will be fully operational in 2021. So as I said, all of the work that the labour market research does informs our policy making. Research gives us an idea of where and how we can best target our interventions. And the trend data also indicates whether our policies make a difference in the way that we intended or whether we need to rethink our approach. We welcome the recommendations that are contained in the research report, and while we will use the findings, it's not just for us alone to take action. I encourage you, industry, academia and training providers to take on board this valuable information. Ideally together we can ensure our pipeline of cyber talent is ready to supply the UK's skills needs. And on that note, I'll let us get into the much more interesting discussion on the labour market report itself. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm happy to come in on this. Sophie, if you're able to hand over control of the slides to me. Brilliant. Brilliant. So thank you very much for that, Erica. So very quickly, I'm just going to go through a little bit of background to the research, and then I'll hand over to Jaya Shah, who will touch upon some of the qualitative research that was undertaken for this project. So I'm Sam Donaldson. I'm a director with Perspective Economics. And within the research that we've been conducting with DCMS over the last year or so, looking at the cybersecurity labour market and indeed the cybersecurity sector across the UK, it's been really, really important for us to identify and understand what exactly is happening within the UK labour market, about the number of jobs that are actually being posted and requested by employers, how much demand is actually out there for cyber professionals, and how is that demand being met by the right form of talent. And I think, you know, coming into a discussion like this, we all sort of know that there's a lot of demand out there for cybersecurity professionals, but there's often just not the right level of supply or the right level, and that's where a number of these interventions kind of come into play. So I'm just very quickly going to go through how we've identified the sort of prevalence of job postings within cybersecurity in the UK, focused very much upon the Burning Glass data set that some people will be aware of. What that essentially is an AI tool that identifies and parses job postings from online vacancies. I'll also touch upon very quickly some of the representative survey work that Ipsos Mori have been doing with cybersecurity firms. So we also work very closely with DCMS to identify what companies in the UK are actually cybersecurity companies, and what type of staff are they seeking to recruit, and what are their skills needs, what are their talent needs. So we have a rich evidence base of survey work gathered from cybersecurity firms themselves about what they need. And also then, and this is what my colleague Jayesh will discuss slightly later on, we also conducted a series of one-to-one qualitative interviews within the research with lead cybersecurity firms, with recruiters, with training providers, to get a real flavour of what are the skills challenges that exist within the UK labour market, and what are some of the interventions that would be most helpful to increase the supply of cybersecurity talent in the UK. So I'll just go to the next slide. I'm just going to touch upon skills demand. So just sort of very, very quickly, as I've mentioned within this, the research we conducted, within the cyber skills in the UK labour market report, we started off from the basis of actually asking the question, well, how many cybersecurity job posts, or how many cybersecurity jobs are there actually within the UK? It's very well and good sort of talking about a skills gap, but you need to be able to actually quantify and define what's in scope. And within this, we developed quite a bespoke search strategy to try to identify across the entirety of the UK labour market. So we reviewed over 4 million job posts within the UK over the last 3 years. And we sought to identify, well, which of these are cybersecurity job posts? Which of these are going to be in scope within our research to understand what type of jobs are actually being demanded by employers within the UK. And the first figure that you'll see on the left there is just over 105,000 core cybersecurity jobs. And what we mean by that is almost technical cybersecurity jobs. So where a job vacancy or job post asks for a cybersecurity engineer or for a CISO, we would consider that to be a technical job. Of course, we also know that there are many jobs in the UK that ask for skills that are related to cybersecurity, but the whole job isn't necessarily a cybersecurity job. So that's things like, might be a sort of an IT support technician, or maybe a junior analyst type role, or somebody working in information assurance, which is all incredibly important for having robust cybersecurity in organizations, but maybe requires less technical skills or different skills than some of the core cybersecurity job posts. So if we break that first figure down, which I'm going to concentrate on, that 105,000 core cybersecurity jobs, what we're really talking about is an estimate of about 35,000 technical cybersecurity job postings being advertised online by employers within the UK. And that obviously doesn't include things like headhunting or word of mouth recruitment, so that figure could be even larger yet. And one of the first things we found within that research was that when you actually seek to identify cybersecurity job posts in the UK, we went through all of the text associated within those job postings to find out what are the job titles and what are the things that employers are asking for when approaching the market to hire cybersecurity professionals. And you'll see from that chart on the right-hand side that there was a huge mix of job titles that don't often define cyber roles well. So quite often we find that employers are asking for a security engineer or asking for a consultant, but there was a wide range of definitions, a wide range of terms, and a wide range of job titles being used within the market, which we felt that we think industry could particularly benefit from having sort of a clearer categorization of how do you actually search for the right job post, how do you search for the right employees linked to what you actually need. So I'm just going to go on to the next slide here. Okay, great. So we also looked at, just gone forward a few. Just bear with me. It's a Belfast internet connection, so bear with me. I'll just go back. This should be it now. Yes, great. So we also looked at what level of talent are employers looking at across the UK. And what we found was that if we look at technical cybersecurity roles, those core cybersecurity roles, and again, this is all sort of touched upon in further detail within the cyber skills report, we find that typically just over half of employers are asking for 3 to 5 years experience for technical cybersecurity roles. When it comes to more sort of junior level roles, which is where a lot of the supply is starting to come through, initiatives like Cyber First and new graduates to the market, we find that those are more likely to be things like cyber-enabled roles. So essentially, what this means is that we find that employers across the UK are typically asking for highly experienced staff, for at least 3 to 5 years experience being demanded for technical posts within staff. And that might have a link in terms of employers also witnessing that they don't have the right level of supply to meet the demand for the talent they need. So there was a number of recommendations set out within the report that Jayesh will touch upon about trying to encourage employers to bring in more sort of core related apprenticeship schemes and encourage junior staff into the profession to sort of ensure that there's a robust pipeline that helps to take some of the heat off the market that we've seen, certainly in terms of the remuneration data and in terms of some of the demand that exists in the marketplace. So I'm just going to go on to the next slide here. Okay, great. And just lastly, then we had a look at how does demand vary across the regions within the UK. And no surprises on the left-hand side, in terms of the absolute number of job postings that were posted by employers for cybersecurity roles across the UK, the main cities across England, across the UK, particularly strong. Obviously, there are significant clusters in London, Birmingham, Manchester, and so on. But what we also find, which is reflected on the right-hand side, is we also looked at the propensity of demand for cybersecurity jobs within the regions relative to their local working population. So reflecting that some smaller populations actually have higher demand than would otherwise be expected for cybersecurity professionals. So what was quite interesting was to identify these sort of hotspots that are emerging across the UK in terms of demand for cybersecurity professionals. Basingstoke, Reading, London, Bristol, Cheltenham, Leeds, Gloucestershire, Belfast, all of these regions, we've seen that higher demand for cybersecurity professionals than you would expect, kind of given the size of those populations. So I'm just going to hand over to my colleague Jayesh Shah, who's going to go through the skills gaps. I'll just use control here.
Thank you, Sam. I'll just wait to get control of the slides. I think that's me. Let me just see if I can move on. Ooh. Take two. Yay. Okay, so I'm going to go through the first of the survey findings. So we did a survey of cyber sector businesses. We've talked about skills demand, and I wanted to focus on, first of all, skills gaps. So just to define what we mean by skills gaps, this is basically where an employer is saying that they lack the cyber skills that they say that they need. This is something that has been anecdotally said for a long time in this industry, that there's a skills gap. You see a dozen articles about it every year from every computer magazine that you can find. And what this research has done is, for the UK, it's validated what has largely been anecdote up until now. And so there is a cyber skills gap. In the survey, we found that 64% of cyber sector businesses were saying that either their job applicants or their existing employees lack the necessary skills, so around 2/3. This breaks down as about 6 and 10, so 59% saying job applicants specifically lack skills, and around a third, 32%, saying that their existing employees lacked the necessary technical skills they needed to do that job. And this is specifically talking about employees in a cyber role. We also found, I think this is really important, that it's not just about technical skills. About 3 in 10 said that their employees also lacked communication, leadership, or management skills. So we're talking about softer skills here that are needed for this cyber role, according to them. This gets on to, or this gets at rather, this DCMS definition of cybersecurity skills, which I'll keep coming back to in the things that I'm talking about. Soft skills constantly come up as being something that can't be ignored in these jobs. In terms of what technical skills are lacking. I thought this was really interesting. So we then had a follow-up question to that 64%, asking, using here the CISEC skills framework, which areas do you lack skills in? And the key thing from this chart is that it's not just in one particular area, it's across the board that they're lacking skills. So it's a range of technical skills that the UK needs to build. This brings me nicely onto the kind of qualitative findings, this idea that there's a range of skills that we need to build. So just to explain, first of all, I mean, we talked about the qualitative research at the beginning. Sam said it's kind of the one-to-one interviews that we did where I actually got to go out and speak to some of the hiring managers in this sector. We also did some interviews with training providers, which we'll come on to later. So not the numbers, but what the qualitative research gets you is the really important themes that are coming out. And one of the really strong themes is this idea that people, hiring managers, were after a holistic skill set. So it's not just about one area of specialist skills. They wanted people who could talk credibly across multiple technical areas, even if they were specialists. They wanted people who could work with multiple tools. The idea behind this is that it's becoming a more diverse sector, and you now need people who can do things with multiple tools and in multiple languages, because there are so many more of them that exist now than there were 10 years ago. This is interesting. So they wanted, employers we spoke to wanted a mix of people who have both GRC related skills and knowledge, and also the more technical side, so the core cybersecurity skills. And the thing I find interesting about this, which we'll come on to again later, is this idea of maybe slightly unicorns. So our employers actually being realistic about what one cybersecurity employee can be expected to cover. Can they be this unicorn that does all of these different things, or is this unrealistic in terms of demand? Employers told us that they wanted and that they felt was lacking an ability amongst their job applicants and amongst existing employees that they'd just taken on to implement the skills and knowledge that they'd gained in qualifications and courses in a business context. So it's not just about having those technical skills and having that knowledge, it's about being able to know, how does this work? How do I do an audit in a business context where everyone else has got a different job to do? And finally, again, another thing that came up within this theme of holistic skills is softer skills, communication and client handling. People said that they wanted, and this is one quote I do remember, cyber translators who can translate the risks into language understood by their clients or by people across the organization who weren't specialists. So what I've done throughout this presentation in the bits that I'm going through is scatter in some qualitative quotes that we got from the people that we spoke to. So this gets across the sense that hiring managers wanted to find people who have a broad brush approach and a holistic understanding of cybersecurity, and that's what they felt that they couldn't get at the moment. So there is a broad skills gap across multiple skills areas, and we wanted to also look at in this study how the training and qualifications market is set up to address this and whether employers think it's doing that. I like this chart because I know none of what these acronyms are, and I always have to look them up on Google every time I have a look at this chart. So it gets across, at least for me, as a non-specialist in cybersecurity, that there's a real alphabet soup. And this kind of gets across why it's actually really difficult for employers, for prospective employees looking for jobs in the sector, and also for recruitment agents who are the kind of third party linking the two together, what qualifications are right for which job. The other two things I get from this, so this is from the job vacancies analysis that Sam was talking about. So this is 37% of job postings that we looked at mentioning CISP, which, as you can see here, is by far the top most common mentioned qualification in any of these job postings. We thought about that a little bit. Is it because CISP is better than everything else? Or is it because that's just the most well-known qualification and happens to be the thing that, because people know it, it ends up getting put on job descriptions and job postings? So it's a mix of the two. And I think actually that's a really important thing to bear in mind. CISP isn't the gold standard and be all and end all. but it's just at the moment the most well-known qualification in this area. Alongside this, of course, you've got a few other Cisco certified network qualifications that are coming up here. I did have to Google what those meant. And they're also in high demand, as are several other qualifications that actually aren't shown on this chart because I had to cut it off at the 3% to be able to fit everything in. So it just gets across how many qualifications with different acronyms there are in this area. Job postings may, of course, include more than one of these, several acceptable qualifications. And this just highlights that there are lots of niche qualifications in this sector for very specialist roles. I thought I'd put this quote in from one of our qualitative interviews. It's a slightly flippant quote. It's the most flippant one I could find. It does show, however, that employers did have various issues with the available qualifications and courses. And that's what I want to talk about here. So this is again from the qualitative research. These findings come from, or the findings that relate to the challenges that we found from cyber team heads and training providers who we spoke to in both cases. So the first thing was the perception of training providers was that it's really difficult for individuals to know how training aligns to specific roles. So if you're trying to get a job in this sector, which one of those courses are you supposed to do to go into a particular pathway, a career pathway? There was also this sense that training needs to be more geared towards new entrants without previous experience, incorporating things like soft skills and more linked to employment outcomes. So this is where this finding comes from, that further guidance linking qualifications to career pathways would be helpful for these three groups. We also talked to employers about the challenges that they faced. Several really common themes came up. So the first was that this idea that training isn't always designed to be accessible at the moment. And diversity is something that we'll come back to later in this presentation. Secondly, courses, and again, this is something that I do a lot of research with employers. This always comes up. So this is a sort of was ever thus and will always be. But it's really important to note that currently employers still think courses can be a little bit too theoretical and academic in this sector. They also said training doesn't routinely build on soft skills. I wanted to mention this again because this constantly came up throughout all of the things we talked about with employers across the whole study. This idea that soft skills can't be ignored. And finally, there was some conversation about the fact that there's lots of specific accredited training and it's not all of equal value. And therefore it's really hard to know, other than word of mouth, talking to other employers, which ones should my staff be going on or which one should I pay for? It's unclear at the moment. And that makes it really difficult to know what to do. We also did talk about apprenticeship placements and apprenticeship schemes and other work placements. Just to note here, some of the challenges that we found around that. So the fact that they can be perceived to lack flexibility. So the current apprenticeship frameworks and standards might not be covering everything that employers want them to cover. Some people noted to us that the difficulty with apprentices and work placement staff is that they don't have time or experienced staff themselves to be able to train others. So how do they get around that? Because they'd really like to have someone who's on an apprenticeship scheme, but that's the barrier. There was also something that came across in terms of the length of placements. So this idea that actually there are often tokenistic placements at the moment. So things that are a month long or 6 weeks long, when really to get immersed in this area and to have a job that's meaningful afterwards, you need someone that's there for 6 months. And finally, we found under this theme that some employers were saying, well, it's not just up to us. We want the flow towards us to be more appropriate. So we want universities and schools to give better career guidance on the different pathways that are available and not just treat cybersecurity as one big sector that someone can go into. This is the last theme I'm going to talk about, and then we'll hand over to Orenate again for questions. I know we're running over time slightly because we started later, so I'll be as quick as possible. So we've gone through training. It's not just a training issue in terms of addressing the cyber skills gap. It's also about recruitment, and it's also about who is working in the sector at the moment and whether it's the sector and employers are taking advantage of the diversity of the recruitment pool. So this is about skills shortages. So do employers have difficulty filling vacancies in the cybersecurity job openings that they have? Vacancies for cyber roles have been hard to fill in about a third of cases. That's what we found in our survey. And just to note, this is 35% of all vacancies, so not 35% of employers. This is a workforce level statistic rather than an employer level statistic. So 35% of vacancies considered hard to fill. We then asked about why that is. So these statistics are a percentage of employers. Now, I guess the eagle-eyed amongst you will notice that the footnote at the bottom of this is a relatively low sample size. So these percentages in the chart on the right are based on 79 interviews that we did. We still think this gives us a really good indication overall of the kinds of issues that are constantly cropping up, and the fact that when you look at this, it is still by large a technical skills issue. So although we're saying these other things are important, soft skills, work ethic, location appears at the bottom there, the majority are saying that it is still a technical skills gap that needs to be filled. We asked about the barriers that employers face when they do try and recruit people in this sector. What happens when they try and use different recruitment methods and interview people? The first thing is, again, something that seems to come up in every single employer interview I do: things are too expensive, skills are highly priced. It felt particularly important for this sector, however, the fact that there's a real premium compared to getting a network engineer and comparing that to getting a specific cybersecurity specialist software engineer. We found that sometimes there's a lack of suitable applicants. Some people are coming up to interviews and misrepresenting their abilities. So there was a lot of talk about people saying that CVs don't accurately represent what this person can really do. We found mismatches between, or people saying there were mismatches between job roles and frameworks and qualifications. So this idea, going back to what I said before, that employers and also employees sometimes don't know which qualifications relate to which job roles. So if they're writing a job description for someone that they want to bring in, what qualifications do they need to put on there that would be relevant for that role? And that's also something that's difficult for recruitment agents to understand. So we found this coming up a few times, and we're doing some follow-up research to this year also for DCMS that's going to look more into what the issues are with recruitment agents and whether it's a knowledge issue for them or whether they're facing their own barriers. The other thing that got mentioned within this, no offense to our chair, is that specialist recruiters are expensive, but I'm sure his rates are really reasonable. So finally, just there's a quote here as well, I think highlighting this specific issue. Got the perception that people were just trying their luck. So exemplifying that, I wanted to talk finally about some statistics that we came up with around diversity. So these statistics are obviously subject to margin of error. We did a survey, we didn't talk to the whole population. They are, however, compiled in a similar way to how the ONS and therefore DCMS uses in its own statistics, compiles as diversity estimates for the whole of the digital sector. And we're able to compare them to those as well. So is 15% of this workforce being female? This is specifically in cyber roles. So this is excluding things like backroom roles, HR, other office roles. Is this good? Is this bad? How does it stand in relation to the digital sector? And actually we see here that it is pretty bad in relation to the wider digital sector workforce. It's almost half as many females in the cyber sector relative to the workforce size as there are in the digital sector as a whole. One other thing I wanted to note on this, or two other things, we didn't have a comparison group for neurodiversity. That's an area that's really important for cybersecurity, hasn't been looked into so much in the wider population and in the digital sector. And on ethnic minorities, it's also something that particularly relevant at the moment. We shouldn't ignore the fact that ethnic minorities is a big grouping. So this seems to look like actually the cyber sector is doing a little bit better than the workforce overall. This could be imbalanced. How many of those are Asian? How many of those are Black minority ethnic? We don't know within this statistic. So we did some work on that. We talked to employers qualitatively about diversity. This is my last slide before I finish on the conclusions, which I'll get to really quickly. Just to note here, this is something where cybersecurity, so diversity in the sector was generally seen as beneficial, although we did get some cynical sort of pushback as well amongst our interviews, which can't be ignored. It was something where some people said, this is not our job, it's beyond our control as hiring managers and employers. It was perceived mostly in terms of soft benefits. So people saying, oh, well, this raises the kind of soft capital amongst our staff. It means we kind of get on better as a team. Not in terms of hard benefits, not in terms of filling cybersecurity skills gaps. And we also found diversity initiatives were kind of often really limited in focus. So they were done not at the cyber team level, but at the kind of higher corporate level in a business. So I'm going to sum up really quickly, including some of the things that Sam said. So it's a complex labour market with strong regional variation in demand. Skills gaps exist across multiple technical areas. And don't forget that there are soft skills gaps as well as technical skills gaps. There's a strong desire for job applicants with a holistic mix of skills. There are issues with the quality of courses and accreditations and how this links to different job roles. And more diversity, the last thing I mentioned, not always being acknowledged as a way to widen the recruitment pool, so not being seen as a solution to these technical skills gaps. Finally, it's unclear how all of this, all of what we've said, which I think will be an important part of the discussion, I hope, is going to change amongst the coronavirus pandemic. Our research was done before that, at the end of last year and at the beginning of this year. So with that, I'll finish there and I'll hand back the slides to the moderator and over to Onate.
Thank you, Jayesh. Thank you for that. We have a variety of questions. Many of them seem to be centered around certification, so I'm going to focus on that. Now, there seems to be an element of confusion around certifications. As we can see from the study, CISP is the most asked for in recruitment job descriptions, but does that really mean it's the best and the most appropriate? I'm going to throw that at Steve.
Okay, thanks. So, well, I think it's already mentioned in the presentation. It doesn't mean that just because everybody is, or the majority of people are seeming to ask for it, that it is necessarily the best. I think one of the things with CISP, again, that was mentioned is it's reflecting a level of experience amongst the people that are holding it. So, CISP, for example, that one of the requirements is that people need to have a minimum of 5 years cumulative paid work experience, spanning at least 2 of the domains in the CISP body of knowledge. So somebody having CISP after their name, that signifies they are experienced to some degree. And similarly, that links to perhaps the point about early career people being sort of disbarred in terms of from some of the opportunities, because if they see CISP as being one of the things asked for, well, they might not be at that level in terms of experience to have even gone for it at that stage. Although I think, you know, again, looking at what CISP means in terms of experience, okay, it means that somebody's experienced in something. Just having the letters after your name doesn't give an indication of what somebody's experienced in. Okay, it could be any 2 or more of the 8 domains that CISP looks at. So that spans things from risk management through to asset security, through to network security. So, you know, a range of different security topics. So you've got to delve deeper to understand what it means. But at the same time, what people can see it means, it's a broad foundation of knowledge in terms of security. So some of the other certs that were mentioned on the slide, for example, CEH, just to pick one that was near the bottom, that only 3% of the adverts were, or the role vacancies were looking for a specific type of security role. It's aimed for the ethical hacking dimension. And so, okay, naturally fewer roles might be looking for that, but it's also aiming at a different level of experience for the candidates that might be going for it and holding it. And I think also, I mean, going back to the point that Jayesh mentioned, in some cases, CISP is going to be popular because CISP is popular. So people see other people asking for it, and it becomes a sort of a standard thing that almost everybody includes in their cyber security vacancies. And so, as I say, that potentially is keeping people who might actually be eligible for the role from applying, because it's putting this implicit experience requirement in there. So I rambled on a bit, but hopefully that answered some of it, Onate.
I understand. I'm actually going to continue with you if you don't mind, because someone that's actually remained anonymous raised a very good question as to what are your thoughts on CISP versus Masters, given the latest views expressed in relation to CISP being equal to Masters. So I'm going to put you on the spot again there.
Yeah, thanks for that. So, I mean, my personal opinion is a little bit sort of comparing apples and oranges there, because certainly, you know, again, going back to the point with CISP, it's signifying a level of practitioner experience, which you're not going to necessarily be able to infer from somebody holding a master's. Both of them, depending upon what the master's course might have actually titled and what it's covered, might suggest that the holder has a broad foundation of knowledge in cybersecurity. And they might both, I suppose, attract, you can have experienced practitioners who might be attracted towards the masters in the same way that they might be attracted towards CISP, but you might have similar types of person going for it. But I don't think they actually equate to the same thing in terms of a reliable, you know, take one and the other and you're naturally going to get two exactly the same people through having, I don't think so at all. I know it's David.
Yeah, Steve and Onate, I think what I would add to that, you know, if I look at the masters that we offer at Queen's, you know, students are expected to spend a significant amount of time actually generating new knowledge, you know, whether it's new ways, new approaches to solving, you know, technical challenges. So, you know, CISP, you know, gives a really broad understanding of the different domains, and the masters that, you know, students may specialize in solving particular challenges, and they're developing new knowledge, which maybe, you know, if they go out into employers, they may seek to incorporate that into new products and solutions. And in fact, you know, our master's students, for example, for their dissertation, they're expected to do 3 or 4 months project, typically with a company, a cybersecurity company, where they're taking on a particular research challenge for that period. So they're developing new knowledge as part of that.
Okay. I want to touch on the apprentices now, because we've had quite a few questions and statements and comments in regards to it. I want to read Steve Thomas's question. It states, my organization has taken on a small number of apprentices and found the conditions around completing the apprenticeship scheme are unrealistic and unnecessarily erroneous. Good candidate, not such a good scheme. Any thoughts as to how we can improve this? And this is not the first question of that ilk. I will throw it out there to whoever is best positioned to answer.
Yeah, just on that, I saw another comment as well saying that, which is fair enough, that apprenticeships are designed by employers for employers. They're just not designed by the particular employer that takes on the apprentice. So there's still this issue about whether apprenticeship frameworks allow that flexibility, which I think is what this other comment that you read out is getting at, which is, can we just have something that's a bit looser that allows us to develop this person in the way that we want to develop them? And I think that's something that a lot of sectors are struggling with. It's not an issue that's like just cybersecurity, cyber sector specific, but it seems really important in this sector to put a focus on apprenticeships and making them more flexible for employers to be able to develop this person in the way that they want. I think it was a kind of slightly beyond the scope of this research to go into that in too much detail, which is why I only kind of fleetingly addressed it. I'd be really interested in what the rest of the panel has to say on apprenticeships.
Okay.
Can I just jump in? Just to say, cybersecurity apprenticeship standards are being redeveloped at the moment, and DCMS is involved in an employer-led group to redesign level 4 cybersecurity apprenticeship. So hoping that we can, I mean, the conversation open, and hoping we can take on board the comments that you made.
I just got that. Okay, Steve, I've got a question. I don't mean to pick on you. I hope you don't take it out on me later. From Baduje, specifically to you, and you've been asked to say a little bit more about Workstream 6 or the council project, and what's that doing in mapping of qualifications and certifications. And perhaps this is something that David can touch upon afterwards as well, or can contribute to.
Okay, so yeah, I mean, this is actually quite a relevant point to one of the things that came up on the slides about employers needing some guidance and signposting towards what is actually relevant qualifications and skills to support particular career pathways. So yeah, what Workstream 6 is doing within the UK Cybersecurity Council formation project, it's focused on, well, broadly titled qualifications, but certifications naturally fit into the scope of what it's looking at as well. And what we're trying to do is something that helps to bring some clarity and consistency into the landscape. So we've got a number of raw materials that we know are already out there, for example, independently of the council project. So for example, we have the CISEC skills framework, which is out there expressing, 11 skills areas and 35 underlying skills groups. Some of that was reflected in the slides that Jayesh was talking about. That reflects different levels of capability for skills that people might have. CISEC's also got a knowledge framework and a roles framework, which expresses a baseline of knowledge that people might be expected to have, and tries to then map this into, well, what might you expect to see in particular roles? But outside of just the CISEC things, we've also got, for example, the CyBOK, the Cybersecurity Body of Knowledge, that's recently been published. And so that's, you know, mapping out a huge landscape of knowledge across 19 knowledge areas. But again, how does that relate to different qualifications and certifications and what they might help you to understand? And how does that feed into career pathways? So this is where this particular work stream within the council formation project is coming in. We've got actually 3 key deliverables we're working on. One is a cybersecurity qualifications framework to actually help describe and define the qualifications and what characteristics they're bringing, what knowledge and skills they're helping to support. A process for mapping equivalencies between different qualifications and certifications. So using knowledge and skills as a key component within that mapping. So you can understand sort of broadly, what does CISP equate to a master's qualification, for example. And when we put the 2 through the process, we'll be able to see quite how closely they might map. And ultimately a cybersecurity careers framework. So looking at different career pathways and different levels of practitioner that could sit within them for a range of different defined specialisms. So I say this ultimately relates back to that point of helping to guide and signpost employers to help them to understand what they need and where they might go looking for it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I'll ask that question to David as well, but maybe perhaps from a degree perspective in assisting employers rather with a signpost and a framework. How do they determine what degrees are most suitable for particular security assignments and positions?
Sure. I guess, you know, at the sort of level 8 level, you're looking at those NCSC accredited master's degrees in cybersecurity, of which there are now about 20 of those across a number of institutions across the UK. Not all those degrees or master's degrees are the same. You know, some will be more theoretical, some will be more targeted towards, you know, governance, risk, compliance type stuff. But that's a good starting point at the master's level. At the undergraduate level, there are a small number at the moment, but an increasing number of certified degree programs undergraduate degree programs by NCSC. And also this year, the NCSC have a new call out under the title of the Academic Centres of Excellence in Cybersecurity Education. And really what that is about the not necessarily at the course level, but at the institutional level, so the academic institution. It's about them developing and improving and bringing some coherence to cybersecurity education, typically at the degree level. Steve's already mentioned the CyBOK, the Cybersecurity Body of Knowledge. So it's a requirement of that ASCSE scheme that universities are incorporating CyBOK elements into their courses, not just pure cybersecurity courses, but you're looking at joint degrees, where it's, might be computer science with cybersecurity, but also wider than that outside of computer science. I've been part of the team pulling together submission for Queen's here, and it's looking at how cybersecurity can be incorporated into every degree program that universities are offering, so that all students are getting access to some form of knowledge about cybersecurity skills and an understanding of information security and how that pertains to their chosen career. So, look out for that. I think the call has been pushed out until September, but you will probably see announcements towards the end of the year around universities that have been given that sort of Academic Centre of Excellence in Cybersecurity Education stamp. And I guess, in terms of employers or people who are looking to study, looking at, if it's a degree program, probably at the ASCSEs. If it's master's level, you're looking at those certified master's degrees, and the ACE and the ACEs in cybersecurity research, particularly, are typically aligned to those. So I know there's been a lot of talk around certifications and CISPs and CEH, but I think certainly employers need to consider those degree pathways. There are a number of them now certified, where they might want to highlight a requirement for a certified master's or a certified degree as they move forward.
I don't know how we are for time. I wonder whether we could squeeze one more in. What do you guys think? Yeah. It's a bit. I just like to touch. We've had a few statements and comments about diversity, no specific questions, but I do take your point on board, Joanne Keane, and I wish it was something that we could get into more. Nick Braithwaite has a question. Do you think there is a lack of internal investment by businesses in terms of learning and development of staff to broaden their cybersecurity skills? Instead, businesses looking to buy off-the-shelf unicorns. Effectively, I think what Nick is asking is there a lack of interest to develop internal skills in individuals, or rather just want to buy something that may not necessarily exist?
I'm just going to say something really quickly on that. I think there is a lack of investment in training, and we've shown that not only on the part of cybersecurity professionals, but also on training on cybersecurity amongst wider staff and also amongst senior managers. But it's not just about that. It's also about the fact that if you're willing to invest in training, knowing where you go to get good training, and then being able to find out, actually, so this training is relevant for this job. I think it relates to one of the other comments that somebody made, which is actually employers not knowing what they're looking for. It's also about not knowing how such and such training relates back to such and such career pathway. So it's something where I guess someone can say something about what the Cyber Council Formation Project is looking into in that area. I think that's really important.
Yeah, and just one very quickly for me as well, in terms of actually enhancing productivity within companies, there's also a question for employers as to whether they want to send their staff on sort of formal qualifications or formal certifications, or whether they're open to things like immersive labs or tools like that, online learning that may not necessarily be accredited, but can certainly go a long way in upskilling staff in what is a market that really requires, a real upskilling on a continual basis.
Right, thank you. Right, now, ladies and gentlemen, I think this concludes the masterclass, unless anyone would like to bring up anything else, any one of our panelists at all. No? Okay, cool. Well, look, I'd like to
Can I just jump in with a big thank you? Sorry, I think I may be slightly behind you. I just want to jump in with a big thank you and say that as we develop council, I think somebody mentioned that some of the issues that you brought up should be considered by the council. I absolutely agree. And the other thing somebody's mentioned in one of the questions about the future of one of our funding programs, just to let you know that most of our funding programs are ongoing in the way that we would expect, but some of them are being reviewed in light of what we think will be investment priorities for businesses post-COVID. I think that's right. It won't take us long. I don't think we want to wait a long time. We want to get on spending the money that we've got to spend on the cybersecurity industry and on cybersecurity within broader industry. But I do think it's a good time for us to look at what we think businesses might want to invest in and how they might invest in them and what kind of training courses really work. So just to say, thank you very much for your comments today, and we will take them away and think about them.
Yeah, a lot of comments and questions. It's a shame we couldn't get round to all of them. Okay, well, I think this concludes the masterclass. I'd like to thank you all for attending the webinar, and of course, a very big thank you to our speakers, Erica Lewis, David Crosher, Professor Steve Fernell, Jay Shah, and of course, Sam Donaldson. Just a reminder to look up for upcoming events of interest on the CSEC website. And I look forward to speaking to you again.
That's great. Thank you so much for that, Onati, and thank you to all of our speakers and panelists as well. I'm sure that was very, very well received by everyone who watched. Just a quick one from me. If you do have any other questions that you want to pass through, do send those over to events@csec.org, and we can try our best to pass those on to you if obviously you'd be happy with that. Yeah, that's great. Okay, that's wonderful. So yeah, just send those through if you have any more questions, and we can try to get them answered that way. As you said, it would be a shame not to answer all of those. It's great to see everyone interact. But other than that, a massive thank you to all of our speakers, our host, and everybody who was able to join. It's been a pleasure having you all involved. Have a great evening, everybody. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks.
Bye.